Hey guys, welcome back to Standing in Faith. My name is Kat, and I'm in the studio with Jeff.
Here I am.
And David.
Hey.
So, we have for the last more than a few weeks, maybe a few months, we've been camping out in the Valley of the Shadow and discussing some of the tough stuff that may be faced down into that Valley of the Shadow. I want to be real specific. I mean, a lot of times when we originally get a call, we get a dream, we get a vision, we're all excited and we start to walk that out, and then all of a sudden, boom, we find ourselves in a valley, and there's things that are, I look at this as the grace of God. It's also His mercy. There's stuff that He wants to work out of us. Mm-hmm. And there's stuff that He's working into us in that Valley of the Shadow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a place that we can avoid. I think it's a place of an opportunity to transform ourselves from the old to the new. Mm-hmm. Which means getting rid of the old stuff and starting to gain the new.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that new stuff is yet matured. But I guess one of the ideas that I kind of wanted to talk about as we're now hopefully leaving the Valley of the Shadow of Death behind us, we certainly don't want to get stuck there. And I think it's a place where we've talked about this, that hope could be lost, that it can be like, wow, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. There's a disillusionment in there. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes those tests and trials and persecutions and sufferings and pains and addictions and all the stuff that we've been talking about, it's a lot. It's a lot. So I guess the first idea that I kind of wanted to chat through, even if it's quickly, is how not to get stuck.
Well, I think, too, you go back to our model of growth and maturity, right? And the seeds and the sowers and all the different scenarios that we've talked about over this period of time. And you can get your charts back if you want and look at them. You look at the chart we had of going down and coming up. You could look at our maturity models of when we did the seed and the sower and all those different things, is to get stuck in different areas of ground where, you go back just to the seed and the sower, where if you don't get the rocks out, like you said earlier, we want to get these things out of the way so you have good ground so that stuff can grow. And I think in the Valley of the Shadow is where we learn humility ultimately, and we've talked about that. Mm. And if there's elements of pride and self-righteousness and all these things that come out from being in there, then you're just going to keep circling back into that area until God deals with your self-righteousness, your pride, your self-centeredness, all the different things like that don't allow you to mature. Because really, it's the fire that God is purifying that you're going through. You're going through fire, and so we want to make sure that in those places, as you look back over this time and you think about it, is look at the levels of maturity and look at where you are in those areas. If you're still stuck on law and you got to do this and judgment and all that kind of stuff, there's some stuff that's self-righteousness. That's stuff He's got to work out of you, right? And when you're pointing the finger and instead of dealing with you and letting God deal with somebody, you kind of have to look at those things. It's taking inventory, mm-hmm. And saying, well, I think when you finally reach the point of just saying, Lord, not giving up,
It's a surrendering to his will.
but it's a surrender,
Yeah.
an ultimate surrender. Lord, whatever it is that you want to take me through in order to refine me and do whatever, here I am. I know, and I say, and Lord, please, give me grace to do it. Give me grace, in the midst of all of that. It's a lot better that we humble ourselves than God humbling us.
It's kind of like lean not on your own understanding,
Exactly.
but in
All
of
your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths.
In the 23rd Psalm, I like how in verse 4 it says, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." And that's as they're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And that's really an attitude or a renewed mind way of thinking of what happens to you when you're suffering or going through trials or things, is you are taking comfort in God's rod and his staff and the things he's working out of you and working into you, is you consider it a comfort instead of like a drag in your feet, or you accusing God of whatever.
Well, I think, too, when you look at the Psalm of the Valley of the Shadow, is taking comfort, right, in his presence. Mm-hmm. It always comes back to with God. With God, we can do this.
Yeah.
If I try to do this, my own strength and power, you're doing it in your natural. Mm-hmm. You're not dependent upon your relationship with him. And to me, that's important. That's why intimacy is so important, is to cry out, Lord, I want to know you. I really want to know you. Mm-hmm. Paul says, I want to know you in the fellowship of your sufferings, he even said, which is huge, And so do we want a fellowship in his sufferings? Because it's his sufferings. What we go through is his sufferings. Mm-hmm. It's not, in essence, it feels like ours, but it's really his.
Yeah, so God's design is not that we stop or get stuck in the valley of the shadow. Mm-mm. God's design is that we follow him through it, to it, through it, and out of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because he wants to take us into the fulfillment of what he first spoke into us anyway in the beginning, and then what that looks like in the end, or Now, you have to realize that that's an ongoing process of life.
Yeah.
There's what he speaks into us, what we go through, and what we come out of. It's a life, death, resurrection process in our life, always.
And as a part of maturity, it's super mature if you walk through that with somebody else as they're going through it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's huge. It's not just, yes, it's Jesus, you're following Jesus through it. Yes, it's you, but if there's somebody alongside of you with that, I think that's where it gets powerful. And the reason I say it's an element of maturity is because, yeah, you're going through it with that person. And there's not necessarily something for that mature person to gain, right? They're walking it out with the other.
Well, I think and John mentioned this when he was talking, so I'm not sharing anything out of camp, but when John was wrestling with stuff with his own son, this was after Josh had died. And in some ways, I was a comfort to him in his process of dealing with his own situation. So, yeah, there is that walking out. So, as what God does with you, he can use you in walking alongside someone, just like you were talking about. I think it's important in that context.
That reminds me of Jesus telling Peter, and go like when you got, I don't know, when he got restored or he was going to stumble or something like that, and then it was like, but when you make it back, reach back and get your brother.
Yeah. So the next phase of this process is we call it the resurrection phase. I think, yes, we're talking about resurrection in the fact that you're coming out of the valley of shadow of death, and those things that are no longer required have been essentially crucified with Christ, right? They're left behind at that point. Mm-hmm. Those other things that are imparted to you through that, now the maturization process kicks off for those new things that you will need that get sown into you by God Himself as you're traversing the valley.
Yeah, and a good example is that Paul said, forgetting those things. Mm-hmm. Forgetting those things that are behind, I press on to the prize of the high calling of God. Mm-hmm. So that's the part where we begin to press on to the high calling of God, as we begin to move away from that kind of thing.
Yeah, and in 1 Peter, he says, as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. I like that, because you were just ignorant. You just didn't know.
Yeah. So
Jesus.
Some of the things some of the topics that we're going to need to talk through are trusting, faith, ultimately giants. There's going to be big things that are going to be opposed to us possessing that which God has called us to possess. It reminds me a lot of, there's a lot of parallels in this with occupying the promised land. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I read something from lovely Oswald. He was talking about Abraham and faith, and faith never knows where it's being led, which I thought was interesting. Mm. But it loves and knows the one who is leading.
Oh, I like that.
I do too. It's a life of faith, not of intellect and reason, but a life of knowing who makes us go. The root of faith is the knowledge of a person, and one of the biggest snares is the idea that God is sure to lead us to success. Mm. You want me to go on? This is still good. The final stage in life of faith is attainment of character. Mm. There are many passing transfigurations of character. When we pray, we feel the blessing of God enwrapping us, and for the time being, we're changed. Then we get back to the ordinary days and ways, and the glory vanishes. The life of faith is not a life of mounting up with wings, but a life of walking and not fainting. Mm-hmm. It is not a question of sanctification, but of something infinitely further on than sanctification, of faith that has been tried and proved and has stood the test. Abraham is not a type of sanctification, but a type of the life of faith, a tried faith built on a real God. Abraham believed God. Mm-hmm.
That's a good summary of all the things we're about ready to start talking about.
I know, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It is. I've been reading 1 Peter a lot lately, and that what you just read, David, sounds a lot like the very beginning of 1 Peter. Just that it's just a. I don't know how to say it.
Read it.
Oh, okay. I'll just read it. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In His great mercy, He's given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you who, through faith, are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that's ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you don't see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your souls. And skipping to verse 13, therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed. I like that because it gives you some therefore. Like, here's all this great stuff. You love Jesus. You're getting refined. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled and set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed. If your hope is just set fully on that, not on any kind of worldly things or any kind of temporal justice or any kind of whatever, any kind of results you are expecting from whatever your efforts or sufferings are, if you just have your hope set fully on that grace that is going to be revealed, because we have grace now, but there's also there's some future things that they have not been revealed yet to us. And so if we just have our hope set on that, it just makes these other things just not seem as important, and we're able to submit to whatever God's will is for our lives and however he's training us or leading us or whatever he's producing, however he's getting the rocks out of our soil and getting the nutrients into it to produce a harvest.
Mm-hmm. I think the power word for me in all of that is hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've discussed it. It's when you're traversing the valley of the shadow, hope is something that I know for me, I clinged. Cling isn't even the right word. I don't know a strong enough word for how. I mean, I locked on to it.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't. I can't think of a word that clamping. I mean, fixing, clinging, whatever the right verb is, but you can't let go of it. And I think it's imperative. For instance, as you're traversing the valley of the shadow, right? It's really important to recognize the goodness of God,
mm-hmm.
and that's what you cling to.
Yeah,
not the punishment or the suffering or whatever you might think about it. No. That is not the design that God has for us, and it's not who He is to think anything other than His goodness and the transformation of what He wants us to. God's desire is that each of us were created uniquely, individually, to fulfill a purpose, to bring Him glory in that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's what He wants. That's the design of it. Anything else needs to be left behind in the valley of the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of back to the whole idea of surrendering your will to His, but clinging to the hope has to be in His absolute goodness and the fact that He is transforming us to be more Christ-like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, He's conforming us into the image of Jesus the Messiah. He's
Right.
conforming us into that image, and
So it's an identity. It goes back to that ladder that we had in the very beginning, right?
Uh-huh.
You kind of need to know who you are, but you kind of also need to know who God is in order to climb up that ladder and mature. You got to have those two things. And I think a lot of times in the valley of the shadow, God's trying to work this stuff out that stops us from being able to mature.
yeah, and especially our view of God.
Right.
To have the right view
Mm-hmm.
of God, because we went through that whole angry God thing and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
That's the misconceptions, the lies, and all those different things that somehow we get either obsessed with or get deceived by. Honestly,
What sin did you commit to get this punishment?
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
would have to go
Yeah.
through the valley of
Yeah.
the shadow.
No.
No.
There's a verse somewhere that says, find out what pleases the Lord. And I like it because you can set your mind to find that out, but he will also reveal it to you. It's like hand in hand, you will find out what pleases the Lord.
In 1 John 3, it kind of parallels a little bit of what you were reading out of the Peter passage. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God. And so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Mm-hmm. Beloved, we're children. We are God's children now. And what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. I love that.
Yeah, me too, because it's like there's some future for us that hasn't even been revealed yet.
And then we go to the hope part, and everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure.
Yeah.
So we're going to, I think next episode we'll probably start talking about trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know, I hope that people listening can feel what the spirit behind the words that you're hearing, but hope is eternal. Hope doesn't disappoint. Hope is victorious. So when we're clinging to our hope through a resurrected Jesus, I think it's hard not to produce trust. But when we're clinging to anything other than that, I think it's easy to lose trust.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it goes back again when the idea of losing trust is that we begin to forget who God is, what he's capable of, and once again, his attributes. God, we did a long series of God's attributes. And because when you stop and consider God's attributes, you realize just how much that passage of just how much the Father loves us.
Yeah.
I mean, it is amazing. It's a love that we can't comprehend with our minds by any means, but to walk through the experience of his love and recognizing just how huge it is. You know, I've said this before, but Catherine of Siena said that God is mad, you know, and she said he's madly. She said this love for us is maddening. It's just she just experienced this huge, intense love from God, and she said it. Yeah, I want to walk in that. I want to experience the maddening love of God. You know, you have to be careful with that in the sense that you're thinking, I don't want to go mad. No, but if it's God's love, I want to be mad in that love. You know, I want to walk into that
overwhelming love.
Overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're walking in that and you're in it, then you can't help but be it, and you can't help but reflect it wherever you go.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the promised land, because that's also, I've mentioned it earlier, but it's kind of thematic to where we're going for that, where we're ultimately going to end up in the area called attainment. I loved how Oswald said it's not attaining success, right? It's not necessarily building an audience or something, right? But it's building our characters. I think that's critical.
Yeah. And God always is more interested in our character than he is our comfort.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I think sometimes, you know, in our world and society has been, I don't know how, you know, for how much longer, but, the two idols that in many ways that are prominent in our culture is comfort and convenience. And sometimes when we have our comfort rocked, we begin to question God all of a sudden. And but He will rock those comfort and convenience worlds in a heartbeat, because He wants you to go walk beyond that, because He wants that character molded in a powerful way.
And even if you don't necessarily have an idol of comfort and convenience, there's a story. Some stories just for some reason they stick in my head more so than others. There's a story of when the Philistines captured the ark, and they brought it back and put it in their temple, and I don't remember whether it was Baal or Dagon, but they put it in their temple, and they came back the next day, and Dagon was prostrate. Their idol of Dagon was prostrate
and broken. Yeah,
and the next day they set him back up, and the next day he was busted in half.
That's right.
His
it was
hands
the
and
next
his
day.
feet
Yeah.
and his
he's
head.
busted in half and hanging out of the door. Right? I mean, we're giggling about it, but thou shalt have no other god, right? I mean, God's overwhelming love for us doesn't like when we put anything
No,
up as an idol.
He's hugely jealous for us.
Yeah.
It's a great jealousy. That's a time jealousy is a good word, because it says God is jealous for us, and I love that.
Mm-hmm. But He will take down the idols that we raise up.
Yes,
And whatever that may be. I mean, maybe it's prestige, maybe it's success, maybe it's stuff, right? As soon as we're starting to put stuff above Him, I'm like, okay, if anything starts getting knocked out from under me, I know it's an idol.
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so we just kind of went down a bunny trail because I really like that story. I want to go back to the promised land idea.
So yeah, I mean, you think about entering into the promised land. One of the things I think we have to look at and begin to see, and we'll begin to work with this, is when the Israelites came out of the promised land, then they had to face giants. But what happens is, because of what you went through, you're able to face the giants and be like Caleb, who said, "No, they're like grasshoppers before us.
Let's go get them."
Let's go get them."
Mm-hmm. So there's some interesting stuff that I've noted about the promised land. So if we look at that just as a parallel to what we're talking about, pretty much, and I'm paraphrasing a lot here. So God stops up the Jordan, so they pass through again. So they had a passing through from Egypt into the desert, and then a passing through from the desert into the promised land. And then they immediately came up against a humongously fortified city that they needed to listen to God on how to, and it wasn't through, it wasn't a normal battle, right? It wasn't like a big, huge siege. It was very different. And then they started to, I mean, they didn't get the entire promised land all at once, right? They got some, and then they needed to occupy it. And then they got some more, and they needed to occupy it. And there was a whole lot of purpose in how that possession of and the expansion of the promised land was fulfilled. It wasn't left empty and desolate.
No, and it was a constant listening to God. After Jericho, there was Ai. Oh, let's just go up and take Ai. Well, they got busted on that. because they didn't stop and say, okay, God,
Yeah.
how do you want to do this? He showed them in Jericho, and then they just go, oh, yeah, well, we
We'll
got
just go do
this
that
piece
again.
of cake.
Yeah.
No, we needed to listen to God. And then God showed them how to do it, and, it worked out fine.
I guess the idea that I'm proposing for consideration is just because you came out of the valley of the shadow, or in this parallel, just because you've come out of the desert and you're into the promised land, it doesn't mean that it's easy now.
Right.
Right? It now means now you've got things that have been deposited into you.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that as God takes stuff out that you don't need, he puts in things that you do. Or clears out a way for the things that are already there to start to grow.
Yeah.
It's kind of like breaking up fallow ground.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're in there. Now honestly, now the maturization process begins.
Mm-hmm.
Right now you're learning to you've been walked through by Jesus, right? Now it's time to start that intimacy part, even to continue it. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
It's a continuation of it, and then it starts to build trust. You start to listen, right? You start to follow. You're still surrendered and submitted to His will, but now, for me, that's where the maturity can grow almost exponentially.
And when you face giants and mountains and whatever, it's very important to remember.
Right.
Remember what God has pulled you through. And if God can do that, then mountains and giants should not be a problem.
Yeah.
But that's where the trust level comes in. We have to trust what God has worked into us and what He's going to do when we face those situations.
Right.
That reminds me of James, where he's like, don't merely listen to the word. Like, don't just listen to it and deceive yourself, but do what it says. Like, listen to it. Don't, assimilate it, eat it, bring it into yourself. Don't just be like, oh yeah, good idea. And then, but it's that intertwining, intertwine with God. Don't just say you're a Christian or you're not, or lip service, or just don't deceive yourselves. Intertwine.
Yeah, I'm all fixed up, man. I've got it now.
Yep, and those giants make you feel like a grasshopper.
No, yeah, big deal, big time.
Which, by the way, in case anybody missed that was a joke. That we should consider the giants as grasshoppers, not us as grasshoppers. Okay. I'm over-explaining things again. Bless the listeners. I really feel like it's important. I want to not just bless, but I want to impart to the listeners hope. That your hope would be rekindled and anchored beyond the veil into the goodness, the love, the grace, and the mercy of Jesus.
And with that, I just want you to, in the spirit of your imagination, I want you to imagine a big, huge bowl of God's oil. And this is hope. Not a hope, but this is joy. And God is just now, right now, pouring out that oil of joy all over you. The oil of joy.
Amen.